your company, whatever you do, is actually going to be a software company and an automation company, whether you realize it or not. Because your future profit and growth is going to come from automation. It's not going to come from hiring more people. That's clearly not a pathway. If you're a retailer, it's not going to come from closing stores. That's not a path to growth. The only path to growth that is practical today and is absolutely coming like a tidal wave is automation. There is the Chief Robotics Officer Summit already. How many of your companies have a Chief Robotics Officer? None yet. You all will. Because if there's a summit, there's clearly a need for someone to fill the role to be able to go to the summit. Forbes says now every company is a software company. I could go headline after headline here. Robotic process automation are already showing big winners. You can read these here: financial services, networking companies, major retailers. So robotic process automation is a very simple concept. It says, let me take what people are doing in front of a screen today, which is often I'm moving this to here, to here, to here, to here, and instead I'm going to automate that and make that repetitive and do it all in software. And people can come in and do robotic software automation in your company now, literally in a week or two, and eliminate those jobs. So what happens to costs when you do this? Well, obviously, costs go down dramatically. Whether you're in the manufacturing business or not in the manufacturing business, all costs go down as you eliminate that kind of labor in a manufacturing business, often taking 20 or 30% off of your overall cost. By the way, the largest companies by market cap are all today software companies. There's a reason for that. GE formed GE Digital, now reports directly into Immel. Why? They intend to be a top 10 software company. First new division at GE in decades. Why the only successful companies in the future will be software companies. Now here's some proof. If 20 years ago I was standing in this room and said, there's this thing called the internet, it's going to change your entire business, you'd go, no it's not. Who cares? So there'll be some websites or some whatever. Every business here was changed by the internet. Am I right? Every business. Yet you couldn't have predicted it 20 years ago. And every business here is going to be changed by software automation and robotic automation. I guarantee it. Just like that. What can we do to be competitive going forward? But to do that, you're going to have to disrupt what you do today. And that's painful. And how I came a way to explain this is, I've been doing disruptive innovation in Silicon Valley for 30 years. 28 patents, blah, blah, blah. But Brene Brown and I were on a speaking tour together. And Brene, if you haven't read Daring Greatly, how many have read Daring Greatly in here? Some of you. It is an amazing, amazing book. And it's really great work that she did at University of Houston. How the courage to be vulnerable transform the way we live, love, parent, and lead. And there's a good chapter in this book on me, actually, because we ran into each other, and she heard my talk on innovation, and I heard her talk on daring and being imperfect and being scared, and we started to put the two together and said, you know what? They're actually the same. Because if you want to disruptively innovate, you have to be okay with shame. Let me say it again. If I want to disruptively innovate, I have to be okay with shame. And the reason is, people are not going to like what I say. They're not going to agree with what I say. And a good portion of the time, I will have been wrong, and I have to be okay with that. I have to be okay with being wrong. Not in the human culture to do that, but it's absolutely critical. And it's critical to do with your teams to say, I want you to take a risk. It's okay to take a risk. And even if you fail, I will reward you for taking the risk. No risk equals no reward. So that's where I came up with this, and Brene and I both talk about risk and vulnerability, and that they go hand in hand, and you have to be okay with being vulnerable. Now, arguably the biggest risk taker of our time was this guy. He started a company. He got fired from his company. He finally comes back when the company is essentially bankrupt. And what's he do? He doesn't say, well, I'm a computer company, I'm going to make better computers. He kind of does that, but he says, yeah, that's kind of interesting, but I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a music player. I'm going to make a music player because a music player is going to be a cool thing. and I'm going to make a music player, even though there's 50 other music players on the market, and I'm going to sell songs for 99 cents, even though people can get them for free. So he had a vision, and what worked here was his board said, do whatever you want. The thing's bankrupt anyway. We already fired you at least once. Who cares? And that one action from a board that was complacent and didn't care allowed Apple to be the most profitable company in history. Now think about that. Because any regular board, those of you who report to boards or up to boards, know that a board would say, listen, we're failing in the computer business. What are you doing thinking of music? Are you crazy? This board was asleep at the wheel, and that's what allowed this to work. So he invented the iPod, him and Tony Fadell. Actually, Tony ran the team, which led to the iPod Touch, which was the first complex operating system on a handheld device, which led to a phone. Now think about this. At that time, this is 10 years ago, a computer company that says, I know, I'm going to make a phone. Phones were for Sony and Ericsson and Nokia and a few other people. They were not for a computer company. It was a ridiculous idea. And still the board said, phone, schmoan, whatever, I don't even know what you're doing. And that worked, as a matter of fact, because it allowed Steve and his team to take those risks. Now here's another company you might remember, Kodak. And I'm from that area. I went to school in Rochester, New York. I know the executives who made these decisions, so I can literally tell you that from the late 60s, Kodak developed and held all the patents in digital photography. They were the leader. And at every executive staff, the executive staff, for 20 to 30 to 40 years, they would argue over whether they should even come out with a digital camera. And at every exec staff, two things won over. One is they felt, who would want digital when the resolution of analog film, silver halide film, was so good, and the color depth was so good, no one would want this junky thing. And number two, we're making so much money on this, 90-point margins on film, why would we ever want to hurt them? Those were two serious, serious errors. And they made a third error in judgment, which was they always felt that people would want to print their photographs because that's how you share photos with family and friends. They could not understand that Facebook and Instagram and Pinterest and others would obviate the need to share them in a photo book. In a book, for goodness sake. What were we thinking? We had to have people come to our home and open the book and flip through pictures. This was only 20 years ago, folks. Well, today, you just post them to Facebook and you're done. It's what we all do. So they failed to see three huge changes in the way we share memories. And thus, they went bankrupt. Now, they came out of bankruptcy. They still exist, but not as a photography company, as a printing company. That was a terrible error by an executive staff that had all the technology and all the patents and refused to see the future and refused to take the risk, and they killed the company. They personally are liable for killing that company. It didn't die itself. So here we go, Kleenex. Everybody knows what Kleenex is, right? Let's say I brought you all in a room and said, let's disrupt the Kleenex market. We want disruptive innovation. And so we get together and we pull a team together, and we even pull people from the U.S. Army. I don't know why, but nevertheless, we get a team together to talk about how we're going to disrupt the Kleenex market. And what do we do? After meeting and fussing and talking and getting approvals and doing everything for 2 years, we've got white Kleenex, and we decide we're going to disrupt the entire market with what? Pink Kleenex. Maybe innovative, not disruptive. You understand the difference? And I want you to think about this at work. Use the pink Kleenex example at work. We're not here to make pink Kleenex. So if I really wanted to be disruptive, I would have stood up in the meeting and said, I know I risk shame, and I probably risk my job, but we're not actually in the Kleenex business. We're in the business of cleaning people's noses. That's the business we're in. And despite the fact we have plants that turn wood pulp into this stupid paper and stick it in a box, it doesn't matter. People come to us to clean their nose. So in fact, I'm going to think way out of the box, and I am going to make the world's biggest snot sucker that you've ever seen. I do not know if snot converts to any word in Portuguese. But nevertheless, the point of this is to think way outside the box and realize you're not limited by the manufacturing plants you have or the business that you're in. You're only limited by the value you bring to your consumer, whoever they are. And you've got to go back and think about that value, number one, and say how with everything I know now about AI and automation and robotics and everything else, can I get a team in my company to be totally disruptive and say if we could think way outside the box,